I was 3 years into finance when I traced where $1 billion actually moved inside a major capital firm. The org chart said decisions flowed from the C-suite. Reality showed something different. Capital moved according to invisible rules that had nothing to do with official hierarchy. Follow the money and you see actual power structure. Follow the decision-making gaps and you see where the real influence lives. That's when I understood closed systems aren't random. They're architected, designed. And once you know what to look for, you can read them like a blueprint. I'm Mark Roach. This is Transcendent. My decades inside of oil, finance, and corporate taught me how to read systems the way the musician reads a score, understanding not just the notes, but the architecture underneath, that makes the whole thing work. Today, we're exploring how to read closed system architecture from the inside. This is the most valuable intelligence you can gather while inside a flawed system. By the end, you'll understand three things. First, the 5-component architecture that makes closed systems efficient, but fragile. Second, how to follow capital flow to discover actual power, independent of org charts. And third, the succession question. That reveals whether you're inside a system or a cult. Now, this comes from literal years spent mapping the internal architecture of systems that wanted to stay opaque, learning that opacity is structural, not accidental. Let me show you what I mean. Closed systems have readable architecture. They all have 5 components that work together. Understanding these components changes how you read the system that you're inside. The first component is hierarchical authority, and it flows from a central leader. In the oil company, the CEO made the big decisions, but the actual architecture was deeper. Authority it just didn't flow from the CEO. It flowed from the CEO's personality, his vision, his particular way of making decisions. This is a lot different from institutional authority that could be transmitted. This is personality-dependent authority. It works brilliantly as long as the personality is present and functioning. It collapses immediately when that personality disappears. The second component is in group conformity functioning as the belonging mechanism. You belong by accepting specific positions and performing loyalty through alignment. In finance, I watched how access to deals, information, and capital worked. You got access when you demonstrated loyalty. You lost access when you questioned the framework. The system created belonging by making people dependent on conforming. It's a brilliant mechanism for maintaining cohesion because it operates at the level of identity. Question the system, and you're not just questioning strategy, you're rejecting belonging. The cost is high enough that most people don't pay it. The third component is adversarial framing as identity foundation. Closed systems need an external enemy. Without an external threat, internal contradiction becomes visible. The oil company had environmental regulation as the enemy. Finance had retail traders or other firms as the enemy. Corporate had market competition or technological disruption. The enemy isn't selected because it's the actual threat. It's selected because it keeps internal focus unified. As long as everyone is orientated against the enemy, nobody questions the internal structure. The fourth component is parasocial relationships, creating intimacy with distance. This is one that most people don't even notice until they're so deep in it. The leader creates a sense of personal connection, despite the fact that the connection is one-sided and entirely constructed. You feel like that leader knows you. You feel personally invested in the leader's vision, but the leader doesn't know you. You're one of thousands. The relationship is manufactured, but your feelings are real. And that feeling creates something researchers call parasocial attachment. When the parasocial relationship is strong enough, followers interpret criticism of the leader as attacks on themselves. They defend positions not because they're thought through, not because they're thought through the logic, but because defending the leader becomes defending their own identity. Now, the fifth component is resource centralization, creating dependency. Authority, capital, decision-making power all concentrate at the top. This creates dependency. If you want resources, you must remain aligned. If you question the leader, you risk losing access. The system works fast because power isn't distributed. But that same concentration means the system is fragile. Removing access and people scatter. Change the leader and the system collapses. These 5 components work together. Hierarchical authority concentrates decision-making, and group conformity prevents questioning. Adversarial framing keeps everyone orientated outward. Parasocial relationships create emotional investment. Resource centralization makes dependency real. The system is incredibly efficient. It can move fast. It can maintain coherence. It can scale quickly, but it's fragile in ways that aren't visible from the inside. Here's how you gather intelligence on a closed system once you understand this architecture. Follow the capital flow. Not according to organizational charts, but in practice. Where does money actually move? Not where the strategic plan says it moves. Where does it actually go? Capital flows reveal the system's actual values independent of its stated mission. I watched a company claim to be growth-focused while actually allocating capital toward maintaining the founder's personal control. The contradiction revealed everything about what the system actually optimized for. Follow capital, and you see the system's true operating logic. Understand the decision-making gaps. Who actually decides? Not according to titles, but in practice. The gap between stated decision-making authority and actual decision-making shows you the system's real power structure. I watched decisions that the org chart said should take 3 months happen in 3 days if the right person approved them. I watched decisions that should have been routine get blocked indefinitely if someone at the center had doubts. The gaps showed me where the real power lived. Map the succession questions. This is the most relevant intelligence you can gather. What happens if the leader dies or leaves? If the answer is that the system collapses, you've identified architectural fragility. The system is personality dependent. If the answer is clear processes distribute decision-making and the system continues, you've found the actual structural resilience. The succession question is the test that reveals whether you're inside a system or a cult. Systems can survive transitions. Cults cannot. Identify the leverage points. Where can decisions actually be influenced? Understanding leverage points shows where real power operates independent of organizational hierarchy. I found leverage points in relationships and understanding what information the center needed in being trustworthy with decision makers' uncertainty. Leverage points were rarely in the formal hierarchy. They were almost always in the gaps between formal structure and actual functioning. Trace the cascade pattern. When the leader makes a decision, how does it move through the system? The cascade pattern shows you how much discretion exists at each level. In some systems, decisions cascade with detailed instructions at every level. In others, decisions cascaded as general direction and local leaders figured out implementation. The cascade pattern tells you how much autonomy exists at different levels and where the system trusts or distrusts lower level decision making. When you understand closed system architecture, something shifts. Your frustration inside the system makes sense now. You're not frustrated because you're weak. You're frustrated because you're reading the architecture accurately and recognizing its limitations. Your inside position gives you visibility that most people never gain. You understand where capital concentrates, how decisions really get made, what leverage points exist, where succession vulnerabilities appear. That understanding becomes your authority, not authority to succeed inside that system, but the authority to build something different. Now, if this feels dense, well, that's appropriate. Understanding system architecture is genuinely complex. I spent years learning to read these patterns, but the patterns are consistent. They show up in organizations of all sizes. They show up across industries. And once you learn to see them, you see them everywhere. And that seeing is the beginning of clarity about what really needs replacing. Now, you're probably inside a system right now. You probably sense the architecture, even if you haven't articulated it yet. You probably notice that some people have influence that doesn't match their title. You may or probably see that some decisions are made through channels that don't exist on the org chart. That noticing is you reading the architecture. Trust that reading. It's accurate, it's valuable, and it's going to become the foundation for what you build next. The architecture of the system you're inside is your map. Study it, understand it, extract the intelligence. This isn't abstract analysis. This is research into what revolutionary alternatives need to solve. I'm Mark Roach. This is Transcendent, wishing you all the best. Your inside position gives you clarity about what needs replacing. That clarity is your most valuable asset.